They called her the ugliest bride in England, and half of London came to Saint Cecilia Church, only to watch a duke's son suffer for money. None of them knew that before the night was over, the bridegroom would be on his knees in front of her, staring at scars her own father had put there. Saint Cecilia Church had never been so full, and never so cruel. Every pew in Highcliffe Parish was packed, shoulder to shoulder with silk and jewels, and not one soul among them had come to wish the bride well. They had come to see a spectacle. They had come to watch a duke's daughter walk toward a man who was, by every account, whispered in London drawing rooms, paid a fortune to pretend he did not see her face. Lady Althea Sterling stood at the back of the church, 27 years old, tall enough to look most gentlemen in the eye, built solid and strong rather than slender and fashionable, with a dark, reddish-purple birthmark spreading across the left side of her face and down into her throat. Small, clustered growths marked the skin beneath it. Her hairline had drawn back at the temples until no arrangement of pins could fully hide it. She had heard every name London had given her: the Highcliffe monster, her father's shame, the ugliest daughter in England. She walked toward the altar without a veil, because lace against her skin burned like nettles, and because she had decided, quietly, on this one morning of her life, that she would not hide. At the altar stood a man the newspapers had already begun to pity. Arthur Pendelton, newly inherited Duke of Blackwood, tall, composed, his jaw set in the calm of someone who had made his peace with a decision before the doubts could catch him. He did not flinch when she came into view. He did not smile falsely, and he did not look away in disgust. He simply watched her walk toward him, the way a sailor watches a storm he has already decided to stand in. The whispers followed her up the aisle like smoke. He must have been paid a kingdom, they muttered. No amount of lace could make a duchess out of that. Someone laughed, thin and cruel, behind a lace fan. Arthur heard every word of it. His face did not change. When Althea reached him, he stepped forward before the clergyman could even give the signal, and offered her his arm in front of everyone. It was such a small thing. It was the first act of loyalty either of them had ever received in that church, and neither of them yet understood what it would cost or what it would save. Althea studied his face as the vows began, searching for the thing she always searched for now, the flicker of disgust hiding behind good manners. She found none. She also found no warmth, no love, nothing but a terrible, steady calm. And calm from a man who was marrying her only for money was almost more frightening than cruelty. Cruelty she understood. Calm hid things. When the register was signed, her father, Lord Nicholas Sterling, Duke of Highcliffe, placed his hand upon her shoulder in a gesture that looked to the 200 guests watching like paternal affection. Althea flinched so hard, the pen nearly tore the page. Arthur saw it. He said nothing, but he did not forget it. And later that night, in a bedroom at Blackwood Manor, with blood soaking through the back of his new wife's wedding gown, he would understand that the true horror of this marriage had nothing to do with the face society had mocked for years. It had everything to do with what her own father had done to her before he ever handed her away. 3 weeks before the grand wedding at St. Jude Church, Arthur Pendelton stood in the frozen ruin of his own inheritance and tried to remember what it felt like to have real choices in life. Blackwood Manor had once been a fine house, the kind of architectural marvel that travellers spoke of with reverence when they passed within sight of its towering spires. Now, half of its great roof let in the bitter autumn rain. The vast tenant farms were mortgaged past any hope of normal redemption, and the family name had been dragged through every sensational newspaper in England since his father, William Pendleton, had been accused of selling secret government correspondence to a hostile foreign power. The resulting scandal had frozen the family bank accounts overnight, driven away nearly every friend who valued societal reputation over personal loyalty, and left Arthur, at the age of 31, solely responsible for a widowed mother who no longer left her darkened rooms, and a younger sister, Cordelia, whose prospects for a decent marriage had shrunk to absolutely nothing.
He had inherited a historic title and a mountainous wall of debt in the exact same week. And he had learned very quickly that a duke without money is simply a beggar with a slightly better coat. So when the formal calling card of Lord Nicholas Sterling, the powerful Duke of Highcliffe, arrived requesting a strictly private audience, Arthur had gone without hesitation, because personal pride was a luxury he could no longer afford to maintain. What Arthur did not yet know, and would not learn for many weeks to come, was that his family's ruin had never been the accident of fate everyone in London believed it to be. Lord Nicholas received him in a massive study lined with heavy leather ledgers and towering old portraits. A tall, silver-haired man whose voice carried the practiced, chilly warmth of someone who had spent a lifetime getting exactly what he wanted from other people.
"I understand your family's current difficulties," Nicholas said without any preamble, pouring 2 glasses of dark brandy. "I understand them rather better than you might expect, young man. Your late father's case, for instance, contained certain pieces of evidence that were never made public. I happen to possess some small influence over whether that evidence is ever brought to the light of day."
Arthur kept his voice perfectly level, refusing to show the desperation clawing at his throat. "You did not summon me to discuss my father's case, Your Grace." "No," Nicholas smiled, a sharp, humorless movement of his lips. "I summoned you to discuss my eldest daughter." He said it as though he were offering Arthur a thoroughbred horse to settle a debt. "My eldest child, Althea, requires a proper husband. I am prepared, in exchange for your cooperation, to use my political influence to completely reopen the inquiry into your father's disgrace, to legally release the entail on the frozen accounts of Blackwood Manor, to settle your creditors in full, and to see your young sister Cordelia properly established in London society. All of this, Arthur, for a single marriage ceremony, and your ancient name attached to hers forever." Arthur noticed, though he could not yet name why it unsettled him, that Nicholas's eyes kept drifting toward a locked ledger drawer at the edge of the desk whenever he mentioned Althea's inheritance, as though some private clock were running that only the older man could hear. Arthur had heard the cruel rumors about Lady Althea Sterling, the way most men in the drawing rooms of London had heard them. They were cruel, vastly exaggerated stories repeated at dinner tables as a form of cheap entertainment for the elite. He asked to meet her before he gave his final answer, because whatever else he was not a coward who would marry a stranger sight unseen and then flinch at her in public to save his own skin. Nicholas arranged the meeting grudgingly, clearly annoyed by the delay. Althea received him in the cold west drawing room at Highcliffe Court, standing rigidly near the window rather than sitting, as if sitting might feel too much like an open invitation to be stared at and judged. He saw her clearly for the first time. The dark, reddish-purple birthmark that stained the left side of her face, the thinning hair at her temples, and the unusual height and breadth of her frame that no fashionable satin gown could ever soften. He saw, too, the way her chin lifted very slightly, bracing herself for whatever expression of disgust was about to cross his handsome face. "You may look your fill, Your Grace," she said, before he could speak a single word. "I am told it is customary to examine the property before purchase." "I am not here to purchase anything, Lady Althea," Arthur replied quietly. "No, you are only here to marry it." Her voice was bone dry, perfectly controlled, and free of self-pity. "My father tells me you are absolutely desperate for funds. I am told by everyone I meet that I am hideous."
It seems a fair enough trade for both of us to pretend otherwise for the brief length of a church ceremony. Arthur found unexpectedly that he did not want to lie to this woman. I will not pretend I am marrying you for affection, Althea. I would be a fool to insult your intelligence with that particular lie. But I will not insult you with false horror, either. You are not the monster the newspapers describe. What am I, then? She asked, her eyes locking onto his. Someone I have not yet had the chance to know, he answered honestly. It was not a romantic statement. It was not even especially kind, but it was the absolute truth. And Althea had received so little honesty in her 27 years of life that the words struck her harder than any poetic compliment ever could have. She accepted the marriage for her own private reasons. Reasons she told to no one, not even to her new fiancé. Her father had promised her that once she married, she would finally be permitted to leave Highcliffe Court forever and live independently at Blackwood Manor, the beautiful estate her mother had left to her in a separate trust. 12 years of near confinement had taught Althea to want nothing in this world so much as a heavy door she could close behind herself, a door that would not be locked from the outside by a cruel keeper. What she did not know, what neither of them yet understood, was the terrifying shape of the trap that was closing around them both. Under the terms of her mother's original trust, Althea would gain full control of an enormous fortune the moment she married or on her 30th birthday, whichever came first. Nicholas had been the trustee of that fortune throughout her minority, and over 12 careful years, he had secretly spent a significant portion of it on corrupt political favors and failed investments. Once Althea married, the massive fraud would be impossible to hide from the auditors. With his crooked solicitor, Archibald Vance, Nicholas had built something far darker than a simple marriage of convenience. Althea would marry, enough money would be released to make the union appear legitimate, and within a few short months, she would die under circumstances designed to look tragically accidental. Arthur, ruined and desperate, would make the perfect suspect for the crime. A forged clause buried deep in the marriage settlement would then return her entire fortune to Highcliffe control the very instant Arthur was convicted and hanged for causing her untimely death. The night before her wedding, Lady Althea Sterling did something that would have ended in her immediate death had anyone discovered it in time. She had spent long, agonizing years learning the precise rhythms of Highcliffe Court, memorizing which floorboards announced footsteps to the guards, which servants reported directly to her father, and which exact hours the West Wing stood empty while the solicitor, Archibald Vance, took his evening brandy in the dark library. Her late mother's old writing cabinet sat locked inside that same West Wing library, untouched for 12 straight years, and Althea had never been able to find the key to open it. She finally found it just 3 days before her wedding, hidden carefully inside a false bottom jewelry case that had belonged to her mother, wrapped in a scrap of blue silk, as though the late Duchess had known someone would desperately need it one day. Althea did not dare open the cabinet that night, because there was simply no time, and she dared not risk making any sound that would betray her. Instead, she did the only thing she could think to do to secure her survival. She sewed the small iron key directly into the inner lining of the thick bodice she would wear beneath her ivory wedding gown, stitching it firmly in place with trembling fingers by the dim light of a single candle, telling herself that whatever waited inside that cabinet, she would find a way to reach it once she was the rightful mistress of her own house. However, someone had been watching her movements much more closely than she knew. Late that evening, 2 of her father's most brutal men came to her private rooms without any warning. They did not strike her face, for the Duke of Highcliffe was far too careful to allow any crude marks that might be visible at the altar the next morning. But they gripped her upper arms hard enough to leave deep, dark bruises, demanding to know exactly what she had taken from the West Wing,
violently searching her rooms, her travel trunks, her jewelry boxes, and everything else she owned. They spared only the wedding gown itself, which hung untouched in her dark dressing closet, because no one imagined a bride would hide anything inside her own wedding dress. Althea told them absolutely nothing. She had learned, over 12 years of torment, exactly how much pain she could absorb without breaking. And she absorbed it all that night, the way she had absorbed everything else, in absolute silence behind a locked door, entirely alone. By morning, the heavy bruises on her upper arms were hidden beneath long satin sleeves and white gloves. The painful cut where the sharp iron edge of the key had pressed too hard against her ribs during the midnight struggle was hidden beneath layers of silk and tight corset stays. She walked down the aisle of St. Jude Church with her mother's secrets sewn against her heart and her father's cruelty pressed against her ribs. And no one in that packed church, whether admiring or mocking her, had any notion of the heavy burden she carried beneath the ivory fabric. She thought, as the loud church bells rang out behind them and the carriage pulled away from the church, of her mother's warm and quick hands, teaching her as a young girl how to hold a needle steady even when her fingers trembled with fear. She had not sewn a single thing since her mother's death, but she had chosen deliberately to sew this, a single act of quiet defiance, stitched into the very garment her father had insisted she wear. She wanted to prove to herself that even her wedding gown might be made to serve her own purpose, rather than simply display her shame to the world. The long carriage ride to Blackwood Manor passed in near silence. Arthur, who had spent the entire ceremony reading every flinch and hesitation in his new wife's posture, understood by now that something was deeply wrong with her, though he could not yet name the source of her distress. Althea sat with her spine perfectly straight, her hands folded tightly over her bridal bouquet, long after there was any practical need to hold it. Her breathing careful, shallow, and strained in a way that had nothing to do with the tightness of her gown.
You need not perform composure for my benefit, Your Grace, Arthur said quietly, using her new style for the very first time. I have already seen you as you truly are, and there is no cruel audience left here to convince. There is always an audience, Althea said, her voice tight, even when it is only you. Arthur did not press her any further that afternoon. He had learned enough in their short conversation weeks before to understand that pressing Althea only closed doors that patience might eventually open. When they finally arrived at Blackwood Manor, the estate staff had prepared the traditional wedding night arrangements, including a young lady maid to assist the new Duchess in undressing, warmed water, and a fire built high against the bitter autumn chill. Althea dismissed the maid at the bedchamber door with a cold firmness that startled the young girl. I will manage everything alone, she said. Arthur, standing in the corridor outside his adjacent room, heard the maid's soft protest and Althea's sharper refusal. And something in his chest tightened with an anxiety he could not yet explain. He waited nearly an hour, giving her the complete privacy she seemed so desperate to have, before he noticed the maid returning down the corridor, looking pale and deeply frightened. The girl was whispering to another servant that there was a dark stain of blood on my lady gown, that my lady would not let anyone help her, and that my lady would not let anyone touch the back of the dress at all. Arthur did not hesitate any longer, knowing the time for patience had passed, and walked straight to her door. Arthur knocked firmly at her bedchamber door, but did not open it immediately, choosing to respect the boundary she had drawn. Althea, there is blood on your wedding gown, he said, his voice carrying a steady resonance through the heavy oak door. I'm not asking to enter your private rooms uninvited, nor do I wish to intrude upon your privacy. But I am asking whether you require a physician to attend to you. A heavy, suffocating silence stretched between them, lasting long enough that Arthur nearly raised his hand to knock a second time,
fearing she might have collapsed inside. Then, her voice came through the wood, quieter and more vulnerable than he had ever heard it before. "Not a physician, please," she whispered, sounding like a frightened child rather than a proud noblewoman. "Do not call for him. I beg of you."
See me, but we must talk.
"Then, may I come in myself?" Arthur asked softly. Another agonizing silence followed, and then the slow, scraping sound of a heavy iron bolt drawing back signaled her consent. What Arthur saw when he stepped into that dimly lit room would remain burned into his memory for the rest of his life.
Althea stood half-turned away from the door, one trembling arm braced heavily against the carved bedpost for support. Her ivory wedding gown loosened at the back, where she had desperately struggled to reach the last of her own tight laces. Arthur saw the dark blood first, a deep, ominous stain spreading across the pale white silk just beneath her left shoulder blade, fresh enough that it had not yet dried in the cool air. Then, as his eyes adjusted to the flickering firelight, he saw what the blood surrounded, and the true horror of her existence was laid bare before him. Old, thick scars, silvered with age, encircled both of her wrists, bearing the unmistakable, tragic marks of heavy restraints worn for long stretches of time during her youth. Narrowing, jagged scars ringed her ankles in a similar fashion. Across her broad shoulders ran faded, parallel lines, where thick leather straps had once held her perfectly flat against a bed.
It was the unmistakable evidence of brutal medical treatments administered against a patient absolute will, layered over by fresh, violent injuries. Deep, finger-shaped bruises darkened the pale skin of her upper arms, and beneath her shoulder blade, a shallow cut wept fresh blood where something small, iron and hard had been pressed too forcefully into her flesh during a struggle. Arthur had learned enough in his 31 years to know that the worst thing he could do to a traumatized woman in this moment was to crowd her space or display pity. "May I come nearer to you?" he asked, keeping his hands visible and his posture unthreatening. "I promise I will not touch you until you explicitly say I may do so." Althea's eyes, when they finally met his, held absolutely none of the rigid composure she had worn like armor since the church ceremony. What he saw there instead was raw, unguarded, animal terror. The look of someone who had rarely been touched without violence or restriction, waiting to learn whether her new husband would be one more monster who took choice from her. "You may look," she whispered, her head bowing slightly. "I find I no longer have the strength to hide it from you." Arthur crossed the room slowly, deliberately minimizing his height by kneeling beside her on the floor rather than looming over her frame. He brought his eyes exactly level with hers, showing her the respect she had been denied for 12 years. "Who did this to you, Althea?" he asked, his voice low. "My father's men did this last night," she replied, her voice shaking, though her chin remained lifted from long habit. "They searched my rooms because they believed I had taken something valuable from the West Wing library." Her free hand moved instinctively toward the fresh cut beneath her shoulder. "I had taken it," she confessed. "I sewed it into the lining of this gown before they could find it." Arthur's jaw tightened with a quiet fury, but his voice stayed gentle. "What did you take?" "A small iron key," she said, as though confessing a terrible crime rather than describing an act of desperate survival. "It opens my late mother's writing cabinet. She died 12 years ago, and I have always believed my father had a hand in her death. I have never been able to prove anything, because he has kept me confined, locked away, and discredited for exactly as long as it might have taken me to try." Arthur thought of his own father, disgraced and ruined by a sudden scandal, and a cold recognition settled over his heart. He understood better than most men in London drawing rooms how easily the powerful could destroy those beneath them and call it misfortune. "Let me see to the cut on your back,"
he said softly.
We'll find a way through.
I will not send for the house physician if you do not wish it.
He is my father's man, Dr. Albert Thorne,
Althea said, her eyes wide with old terror. He signed the medical papers that let them strap me to a bed for weeks at a time and called it a treatment for nervous instability. I have not trusted a single physician in 10 years, and I will not begin tonight. Then I will tend it myself, if you permit it, and we will send for someone independent in the morning. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for the flicker of disgust or pity that would tell her this was all a cruel performance. She found instead something steadier. A man kneeling on the floor, asking permission for every small thing, refusing to take from her the one power she had left, which was the power to say yes or no to her own body. Yes, she said finally. You may tend to me. Arthur fetched clean water and white linen himself, rather than ringing for a servant who might carry tales back to Highcliffe Court by morning. He worked with careful, unhurried hands, wiping away the blood and binding the wound. Though the room held nothing but candlelight and the quiet business of tending a wound, it became, without either of them intending it, the most intimate moment either had ever shared with another person. Althea watched him work and found herself thinking not of the pain in her shoulder, but of how strange it was to be touched so carefully by a stranger she had married only that morning. Gentleness, of all things, was the sensation that finally broke through 12 years of careful armor. You are very quiet, Arthur said without looking up from the bandage. I am considering how many ways I expected this evening to go, and how none of them resembled this, Althea admitted. Was I meant to be crueler? He asked.
I'm glad you're here.
You were meant to be gone by now, Althea said honestly.
I have tried to make this work.
Most men would have left the moment they saw the scars and called for an annulment before morning.
Then it is fortunate, Arthur said quietly, that I have never much cared what most men would do. When the bandage was secure, Arthur sat back on his heels and looked at her, at the scars, the bruises, the birthmark, and the thinning hair, all of it lit gold by the fire, and said the only thing that felt true. I knew what you looked like when I married you, Althea, but I did not know that someone had tried to break your spirit before placing you in my hands. I intend to find out who and why, and I intend for it to stop permanently. Althea, who had braced herself for pity and received instead a promise of protection, felt some old guarded wall inside her heart give way quietly, without her permission, in a manner she did not yet have a name for. The small iron key, still stained with her own blood, lay on the table beside them, waiting for the dark path ahead. Within a week of the wedding, Althea understood how wrong she had been to believe that Blackwood Manor would be a safe haven beyond her father's reach. The estate staff seemed to defer to secret instructions arriving from elsewhere. On the fourth day, Dr. Albert Thorne arrived unannounced, claiming concern for the new Duchess' nerves, but Arthur turned him away at the door with biting coldness. My wife does not require a physician chosen by her father, Arthur told the man plainly. If she requires one at all, I will choose him myself. Althea, watching from the top of the grand stairs, felt an unfamiliar warmth move through her chest as she watched her husband defend a boundary she had spent 12 long years defending entirely on her own. Over the following days, a fragile domestic peace began to take shape between them, built less from romance than from sheer necessity. They began taking breakfast together, tentatively at first, then with less hesitation. Arthur discovered, to his genuine surprise, that his wife understood complex estate management better than most professional stewards he had employed. She corrected an error in the Blackwood accounts within her first week that had cost the tenants money for years, and she reviewed petitions from the tenant farmers with an attention to detail that put his own education to shame.
You were raised to manage a
apologize
grand
for
estate,
interrupting your
Arthur said one
concentration.
morning, watching
I
her
was
mark
merely
corrections
admiring
in the
the
heavy
detail of
ledger
your
with a
work.
steady hand. I was
Every name
raised to
written
be
on these
useful to
pages
no
is a
one but
testament
my
to their
father,
cruelty.
Althea corrected,
I will
without
not
looking up
forget
from the
what they did
page.
to us.
The rest I taught myself in the hours he falsely believed I was resting. Arthur found himself, against every original intention of remaining courteous but distant, beginning to admire her deeply. It had nothing to do with her face, and everything to do with the sharpness of her mind and the quiet steel beneath her caution. There were smaller, tender moments, too.
Althea avoided one particular chair in the drawing room. A delicate, gilded thing she feared her solid weight might break, though she said nothing of it aloud. Arthur noticed her hesitation anyway. Within days, a sturdy, upholstered chair appeared beside the drawing room fire, offered without comment, without the humiliation of acknowledgement, simply there for her comfort the next time she needed to sit. When a fashionable London dressmaker arrived to fit Althea for new gowns and began speaking about her large figure as though she were not present in the room, suggesting heavy fabrics to disguise her shape, Arthur dismissed the woman before Althea had to say a single word. Althea, furious at being handled rather than asked, told him plainly that she had not requested his rescue.
Arthur, to his credit, apologized without any excuse and let her choose her own seamstress after that. A local woman named Elsie, sister to Althea's maid, Margaret Finch, who fitted her gowns to the body she actually had, rather than the one society wished she possessed. There were lighter moments, too, inside a marriage built on desperation. One wet afternoon, with the rain too heavy for anyone to think of riding out, Arthur led Althea to the long gallery and declared with the gravity of a man announcing a battle plan that she would learn to dance.
I
have never danced in public in my life, Althea told him, her arms folded tightly. I do not intend to begin in an empty gallery with no orchestra and one reluctant duke for an audience. The orchestra will arrive eventually, Arthur said. Until then, you will have to make do with my humming, which I promise you is worse than any string quartet in London. She stepped heavily on his foot within the first minute, hard enough that he winced.
My foot, Arthur said with great solemnity, has now received more attention from you than I have since our wedding day. It has shown greater courage, Althea answered, and to her own surprise, she laughed a real laugh, startled out of her, the kind she had not allowed herself in years. Arthur went still at the sound of it, and he did not manage to hide how much it undid him. From that afternoon forward, he found himself listening for her laughter the way other men listened for church bells. Cordelia Pendleton arrived at the estate not long after, bringing an energy the house badly needed. She attached herself to Althea within a single day with fierce loyalty. When a visiting countess remarked, just within earshot, that she wondered what such a large woman found to wear that actually fit her, Althea answered without even glancing up from her tea. "You need not trouble yourself over my wardrobe, Lady Fitzpatrick. It has survived far more determined attacks than your vocabulary." Cordelia, delighted, leaned toward her and whispered, "Was that an insult?" "Only if she is clever enough to understand it," Althea replied. Even Christopher Finch, the elderly butler, proved a quiet source of comfort, helping to protect Althea's secrets since long before her husband ever arrived to help carry them. But the shadow across those warming weeks deepened into disaster. Margaret Finch, Althea's loyal maid, had taken to tasting her mistress's evening chocolate before serving it, a habit born of old suspicion. One evening, she drank from a cup meant for Althea and collapsed within the hour, her breathing shallow and her skin cold to the touch. Arthur did not wait for the household physician. He rode himself in the middle of the night to fetch an independent doctor from the neighboring town. Margaret survived, though it took 2 days before her fever broke. Althea sat beside the girl's bed through both of those days, her hands never still, guilt and fury moving through her in equal measure. It was meant for me, she said quietly to Arthur.
They are coming.
Someone in this house is still reporting to my father. This was never a refuge. It was only ever another cage with better furniture. Then we stop waiting for your father's permission to be safe, Arthur said, his voice changing entirely. We stop waiting, and we begin fighting back. That night, Althea led Arthur to the West Wing library, where her mother's writing cabinet now stood. The small iron key, healed into the story of Althea's own skin, turned in the lock with a final click. Inside lay a ledger written in a private code, dozens of letters, and an old portrait of her mother. The coded ledger took weeks to understand, and it was Althea who broke through the cipher, remembering how her mother disguised real figures inside ordinary domestic entries.
Line by line across evenings that stretched long past midnight, they pieced together the truth. Lord Nicholas Sterling had been systematically stealing from Althea's inheritance for years to fund failed investments, and he could not permit an independent audit once her marriage handed her legal control. Then Arthur found a name in the ledger that made his blood run cold. Massive payments made to a newspaper editor and an official to frame his own father, William Pendelton, for treason. My father was framed, Arthur said, his voice flat with fury. Your father destroyed my family to eliminate a witness. Before they could act, the desperate solicitor Archibald Vance took matters into his own hands. He could not risk the evidence reaching a court of law, so he arranged for a fire to consume the library. The fire spread with terrifying speed. Althea, hearing the alarm, did not think of her safety. She ran through the smoke to rescue the ledger. She closed her hand around the book just as the ceiling gave way. Arthur, who had followed her, reached her through the collapsing timber, a heavy beam falling hard across his shoulder. It was Althea who found the hidden servant's exit, bracing his injured shoulder against her own, half carrying her husband out into the cold night air with the bloody ledger pressed beneath her cloak. They did not stop until they reached the old chapel at the edge of the estate, where moonlight fell across the bare altar. Soot-streaked and trembling, Arthur looked at her and finally confessed his heart. I married you to save my estate, he said. I intended to call it duty, because duty asks nothing of the heart. But now I understand that a house built on your ruin would have finished destroying us both. I do not want Blackwood at the cost of you, Althea. I search for your face whenever you leave a room, and I do not wish to imagine a house that does not have you in it.
Althea felt her long guarded walls dissolve, and their first kiss was slow, careful, and entirely their own choice. The formal inquiry convened at Westminster Hall on a grey autumn morning, attended by high-ranking trustees, magistrates, eager journalists, and prominent members of both the Sterling and Pendleton families. It had been called ostensibly to settle a complex dispute over trust management, but nearly everyone present understood the gathering to be something far larger and more scandalous. Lord Nicholas Sterling had fully expected a quiet, private settlement, conducted exclusively among wealthy gentlemen behind closed doors. He had certainly not expected his eldest daughter to arrive openly on her husband's arm, wearing a deep green velvet gown fitted honestly to the large body she actually possessed, without a thick veil to hide her features, without a high collar to conceal her throat, and with her dark hair arranged simply, without any desperate attempt to disguise the thinning areas at her temples. It was not a cosmetic transformation, but rather the visible, defiant end of 12 long years spent apologizing for her very existence. Loud whispers moved through the crowded halls of Westminster the exact moment she entered the room. They were the exact same kind of cruel whispers that had once followed her up the long aisle of Saint Cecilia Church during her wedding ceremony. This time, however,
Althea did not lower her eyes to the floor. She had spent an entire lifetime being watched without her consent, mocked by strangers for a face and a body she had never asked for and could not change. She had decided somewhere between the terrifying library fire and this cold autumn morning that she would rather be watched while telling the absolute truth than remain hidden while carrying someone else's shame. Nicholas had chosen the prominent venue carefully, expecting the familiar noble faces of Westminster to side with old political loyalty over a new family scandal. He had vastly underestimated how quickly loyalty curdles once a room full of powerful men begin to suspect that the accused might be a mirror of their own hidden crimes waiting to surface. Althea understood this basic human instinct far better than her father ever had. She did not need every man present to love her. She only needed enough of them to fear being caught publicly defending an exposed liar. Nicholas attempted, in front of the assembled magistrates, to paint his daughter as emotionally unstable, helplessly dependent on wild delusions, and entirely unfit to manage the vast fortune she was fighting to claim.
Althea answered each accusation not with tears or emotional defense, but with hard evidence laid out with the exact same careful precision she had once used to correct the Blackwood tenant ledgers. She calmly presented Dr. Albert Thorne's falsified medical reports, providing undeniable proof of years of illegal confinement built on manufactured diagnoses. She presented the direct bank transfers showing systematic theft from her own maternal trust fund over a decade. She presented the crooked solicitor, Archibald Vance's forged marriage settlement clause, the precise one meant to hand her entire fortune back to Highcliffe Control the very moment Arthur was convicted of a murder that had never actually occurred. Furthermore, she presented the decoded page from Scotland and her mother's final letter, which had been preserved for 12 frightened years by Nicholas's own sister, Lady Beatrice Sterling, who finally came forward to speak with the courage she had lacked for over a decade.
She presented the secret correspondence of William Pendelton, proving beyond any doubt that her father had destroyed an innocent man's reputation to silence a witness to his financial theft. Finally, she presented Margaret Finch's own testimony about the poisoned cup of chocolate that had nearly cost an innocent servant her young life. Archibald Vance, seeing the legal case collapsing around his employer, suddenly attempted to shift every single crime onto Nicholas's shoulders, only for Althea to reveal with quiet, devastating precision that Vance had kept private copies of his forgeries for years, intending all along to blackmail whoever eventually inherited the Highcliffe title. Nicholas, cornered at last by mountains of evidence he could no longer discredit or hide, lost the cold composure that had served his ambitions his entire life.
Had Eleanor surrendered the papers when she was first warned, he shouted, his voice rising in anger for the first time anyone in that room had ever heard it rise, none of this would have occurred. The entire room went silent at the shocking admission buried inside his own fury. Pressed further by the relentless magistrates, Nicholas revealed in a moment of broken pride that he had watched his wife fall from that gallery 12 years before, dangerously impaired by a strong sedative Vance had substituted for her regular heart medicine, and had chosen deliberately not to call for any help. Arthur did not speak over his brave wife throughout the entire lengthy proceeding. He intervened only once, when Nicholas's remaining men attempted to physically remove Althea from the room, stepping between them with a quiet authority that needed no raised voice to command respect. He then submitted his own signed refusal of Nicholas's final bribery bargain as formal evidence, providing absolute proof that he had given up an entire fortune rather than betray the woman standing beside him. "My wife," he told the inquiry firmly when at last he was asked to speak, and my absolute equal in every part of this matter. The magistrates conferred only briefly before ordering both men held for immediate trial. Nicholas Sterling and Archibald Vance were both arrested before the inquiry adjourned, held on serious criminal charges that would end in the months that followed, with Nicholas stripped of his historic influence and Vance sentenced to long imprisonment for forgery and conspiracy. Dr. Albert Thorne lost his professional medical license permanently and faced heavy prosecution for the false confinements he had authorized for private profit. William Pendelton's name was formally cleared of all treason charges, and Arthur's family honor was fully restored. Althea received full and legal control of Blackwood Manor and her mother's entire fortune. In the quiet weeks that followed the trial, Arthur told Althea plainly that the coercive circumstances under which she had married him meant she was free to seek an annulment or a legal separation now that she had choices. "Do you want your freedom from me?" Althea asked him directly. "No," Arthur said, "but your choice must matter more than what I want." Althea chose him, and they exchanged new vows privately at Blackwood Manor in the beautiful spring that followed, with no cruel father presiding, no newspapers watching, and no money changing hands. Within 2 years, Althea gave Arthur a healthy son, naming him William, after the grandfather who was finally allowed to rest with his name fully restored. Standing at the head of her crowded dining table under the warm candlelight, with her birthmark and her scars fully visible, Althea looked at her husband and knew she no longer needed anyone's permission to be the most unshakable Duchess England had ever produced. Dear friend, thank you for spending this hour with us here at the fireside. If the story of Lady Althea and Duke Arthur moved something deep within your heart tonight, then you already understand why we continue to tell these timeless tales of courage and redemption. If you enjoyed this journey through dark, noble scandals, cruel family secrets, and a profound love that was never bought but finally chosen by two unbroken souls, please take a brief moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Do not forget to leave a warm comment below telling us exactly which city or country you are watching from tonight, as we read every message and your presence means more to us than you know. We would also love to hear which moment in their journey struck you the hardest. Was it the secret iron key stitched inside the white wedding gown? The terrifying night fire in the manor library? Or the beautiful vows spoken in the spring with no cruel father left to watch them? We have another powerful duke, another gripping societal scandal, and another remarkable woman the world foolishly underestimated waiting to meet you very soon. So, please make sure your notifications are turned on and you are ready when she arrives at the hearth. Until our next story, thank you for your beautiful support, and thank you for believing, just as we do, that the ones the world calls broken or unworthy are so often the very strongest people in the room. Good night, dear friend, and we will see you at the next fireside.